3-drop in the deck.
Tomajko, a player that we already know we'll be seeing in December for the Players' Championship. He was able to safely draw the last 2 rounds into the top 8 here. Ended up being a lower seed because of it, but in a great position. So Johhson is the higher seed, but Tomajko has mulliganed as well. Couple things going Johnson's way already here. So we have 7 cards for Johhson versus 6 for Tomajko. Johhson starts with Temple of Mystery. Gave it a scry.
And of course, he was the 4 seed versus Oliver's 5 seed, so he is going to be on the play to start things off. Both players utilizing these reprinted scry lands from the original Theros block, and both of them putting it to good use, smoothing out the draws in the early turns because neither deck really has a ton of things to play on 1 mana.
Johhson scried bottom, Tomajko scried top. We'll go to turn 2 for Chris Johhson.
Johnson's going to look here to get things started with a mana accelerator of some kind. He has plenty in his deck. If he doesn't play a mana accelerator, you can only assume that he's going to fall pretty far behind.
Well, it's not a mana accelerant. He does have a turn 2 play, though. It's a Creeping Trailblazer.
Yeah, this one can be a bit aggressive, pumping your other elementals, but it doesn't pump itself to start. And the ability to buff it does cost quite a bit of mana. I'm not sure it's something Christopher wants to really get into right now. It's just kind of playing it because it was the only thing to play.
Turn 2 play for Tomajko is Dread Horde Arcanist. This is a card that can generate a lot of value for the Feather deck.
Yeah, for sure. Defiant Strike, getting to draw 2 cards and pumping the power is pretty nice. Replaying a Shock is awesome. Just a lot of stuff to do with this Arcanist in the deck. Sometimes even just bringing back a God's Willing to make an additional creature unblockable is huge.
Land 3 for Johhson is a Rootbound Crag, and on turn 3 he's going to be casting Chandra Acolyte of Flame. That combines pretty well with the Creeping Trailblazer. It makes elemental tokens with haste, and they get +1/+0.
Yeah, this is a bit of burst damage here coming out from Johhson. Luckily, the Dreadful Arcanist does have 3 toughness, though, so Oliver's going to pretty safely jump in front of one of these creatures to prevent some damage, and then the elementals go away at the end of turn. So it's not like Johnson's accruing a large battlefield. He's just doing a bit of chip damage in the meanwhile. And Oliver here does have access to Shock in hand. If he chooses, can just go Shock Chandra Acolyte of Flame, attack, Shock Chandra Acolyte of Flame again.
4 points come across, Tomajko to 16, and we'll see what he has on turn 3. As you mentioned, there's a Shock hanging out there.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what else is in the hand, though, because Shock is quite a good one here for the Arcanist, at the very least clearing the Chandra Acolyte of Flame, but he could also just clear the Creeping Trailblazer and kind of let the Chandra sit around for a while because it's not all that threatening. It needs specifically Lightning Strike to be really good against the Dreadhorde Arcanist, but if the Johhson doesn't have access to Risen Reef, then it's not very scary at all.
Draw looks a little land heavy from Tomajko, getting a glimpse at the hand. Plays land number 3. Starts by shocking the Trailblazer. It's like Gird for battle, so now he has a 2-power Arcanist. Attack, bring the Shock back.
That's nice.
Yeah, so Shock the Chandra, attack Chandra for 2, Chandra down, so now Johhson just down to lands.
Yeah, and it was a clean 2-for-2 trade. Traded Shock plus Gird for battle for Creeping Trailblazer and the Chandra, and it left a +1/+1 counter on his Dreadhorde Arcanist. And he still has Gird for battle in the graveyard, so if he has a creature to play next turn, maybe a Feather, he can activate the Dreadhorde Arcanist's ability, putting an extra counter on his creature, and the Feather actually returns it to his hand because they're both replacement effects that exile the card, so you get to choose whether you want Feather to do it or the Dreadhorde Arcanist to do it, I believe.
One of the unique elements of Johnson's builds is he's playing 4 Lightning Strike, but that Gird for battle counter, that 4th toughness on the Arcanist, that can be a big deal.
And Johhson here shocking down to 18. Looks like he's going to play a pair of 2-drops, 2 Leafkin Druids to get the mana ramping. Looking to play some pretty expensive spell next turn, or maybe just a couple of spells next turn.
Yeah, 2 cards in hand left over with those Druids deployed, and we go back to Tomajko. Draws Plains for turn, not really what he wants to see.
Yeah, Tomajko here looks like he's a little flooded with 3 lands in hand at least. Might have another creature to play to get a bit of added value from the Gird for battle. The Dreadhorde Arcanist notably is also a May ability, so if you don't have a great creature to Gird for battle, you don't actually have to do it.
So here's a Legion War Boss to join the Arcanist. Makes a Goblin token, attacks with the Arcanist, going to cast a Gird for battle, pump the Warboss and the Arcanist.
Now this also gets Legion Warboss out of range of Shock, which Johhson does have access to 3 copies. It also puts the Dreadhorde Arcanist out of range of a -3 on a Chandra Awakened Inferno.
So there's a block on the Elemental token, 3 comes across, Johhson to 15. We'll see what he can do with all this mana. Previous turn was just 2 mana creatures, and not a lot else going on so far.
Yeah, and if you're Johhson, you got to think Oliver's probably got at least a God's Willing in hand, maybe some other protection spell, maybe even a Reckless Rage, and just doesn't want to burn it on the Leafkin Druids because they're not all that consequential. So you have to be thinking about all these cards running through your head for your turn, and you got to try to play around them as much as possible.
Well, here's Omnath, and he's just going to run that right into the Warboss, and it works. Warboss down.
Yeah, he probably figures, well, I don't have much time left to really get back in this game. Omnath going to swing for the fences, and luckily for him, Oliver's just sitting on empty.
Yeah, Sacred Foundry was the draw for turn. Tomajko attacks with the Arcanist for 3, but there's no spells to cast this time. Johhson takes it to 12. Tomajko plays that tapped Sacred Foundry, and now Johhson gets another opportunity to pull ahead on the battlefield.
Yeah, this is really where the Elementals deck starts to grind. You get a lot of extra mana from the Leafkin Druids. Every land you draw is still netting you a +1/+1 counter from the Omnath Locus of the Royal, as well as pushing you towards that necessary 8 lands to start drawing a card every time. He has access to 6 mana here, so he can cast a Chandra Awakened Inferno if he has it.
He's reaching for a lot of mana here.
Magic player Christoph Connor.
Cavalier of Thorns will be cast.
That's a pretty good one. Oliver doesn't have a lot in his deck that can really get through this Cavalier of Thorns.
This will put 1 of 2 lands on the battlefield, which will also trigger the Omnath to grow one of the elementals.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice effect here. It's also untapped, so Johhson also has access to 3 potential mana with the untapped Leafkin Druid and the land he gets off of it.
And land will be Rootbound Crag. Omnath grows itself.
It would be nice if Johhson could get that out of range of a Reckless Rage, getting it up to 5 power this turn.
Here's an attack for 4. Tomajko not interested in blocking. He'll fall to 12. 12 all now.
And he doesn't have access to that land to play for turn. So.
Tomajko draws another land, and he's had enough. He's going to pack it in for game number 1.
Pretty sure that was like 7 or 8 lands and 4 spells.
Yeah, not a good spread for Tomajko.
No, and especially on the mulligan, he was a little low on resources, got a lot of value out of that Dreadhorde Arcanist early, but unfortunately just couldn't draw the necessary spells to keep pace. And Christopher Johhson, even though he was a little slow out the gates, ultimately Tomajko was just a bit too light in the action department.
Yeah, so Johhson now up a game, going to consult the sideboard, see if he can pull even further ahead. In the sideboard, he has 3 Fry, 3 Cinder Vines, 3 Ether Gust, 2 Shifting Ceratops, 2 Flame Sweep, and 2 Disdainful Stroke.
So you get a little splash damage here from things like Ether Gust and Fry because Fry can take care of the white creatures, whereas Ether Gust can maybe tag some of the red creatures. So I might be looking to bring both of those in. The deck's really low to the ground, so stuff like Disdainful Stroke's pretty bad. The creatures have pretty high toughness or can get high toughness, so Flame Sweep's not great. And then Cinder Vines might be something you would want in this matchup if you were a bit more aggressive. But for the most part, Cinder Vines is going to deal Oliver like 5 damage, and then you're just going to die.
So Tomajko's going to need some help here. Now down a game. The sideboard for him. 1 Aurelia Exemplar of Justice, a Baffling End, a Prison Realm, 2 Fry, 3 Gideon Blackblade, 3 Lava Coil, and 4 Demystify.
You want to go to the skies, and you want to kill creatures. I think Aurelia Exemplar of Justice is phenomenal here. It does get kind of brick-walled by something like the Cavalier of Thorns, but outside of that, it's just an insane card. Not only does it fly, but it can pump other creatures to make combat impossible for your opponent, while also growing them with that Mentor ability. I like the Baffling End to slow down the mana creatures. I like the Prison Realm for similar reasons, and plus there's some Planeswalkers hanging out that you might want to take care of. And then Lava Coil might be another decent option just to contain those early drops from Christopher Johhson and really slow his development.
We got a sale going on StarCityGames.com.
Oh, do you?
Because we've always got a sale going on StarCityGames.com. Changes every Monday. Right now, though, if you get in before tomorrow, you get 10% off of promo cards.
Yeah, this sale on promo cards ranges from F&M promos to Judge Foils, I believe, to all sorts of various promo cards that have been printed throughout Magic's history. A lot of really sweet foils and alternate art things that you can pick up for your cube or your commander deck if you so choose, as well as a couple of sweet ones for Modern, like alternate art Mox Opals and such.
Yeah, the MCQ Arcbound Ravager is a recent promo. It looks like a dog. Everyone likes dogs.
Yeah, you can get that old GP Emrakul promo. That one's nice.
Yeah, shop around at go.starcitygames.com/sale and keep up on that every week because it's always changing.
Yeah.
Fill up your wish list. Maybe what you want goes on sale.
Yeah, if you put something on your wish list that you do want, you can set like a price or something, and whenever it hits that price or we get a new one in, if we don't have it in stock, you do get an email letting you know that what's on your wish list has changed.
Players taking the opportunity to count their decks.
Just what'd you call it? A deck or face-up count or something like that?
Table count.
Table count. Because it's not shuffling.
Nope. You really don't want to present an illegal deck in the top 8 of a tournament, though. Really, you shouldn't ever do it, but you got all the time in the world right now. We're not going anywhere.
I mean, I'm going somewhere in a little bit. All right, this minute.
Yeah, I mean, my flight's tomorrow, so I would like to not stay overnight.
Yeah.
Having worked a non-zero number of overnight shifts, I'm very much over it.
Yeah. So Oliver here, going to be on the play for game 2. Going to be looking for an opening hand that contains probably just 1, maybe 2 threats. And then wants all of those tricky interactive spells, whether it's Reckless Rage or, God's Willing, Protection, Defiant Strike, stuff like that. The bee's knees is going to be Feather, as long as Johhson doesn't draw away to deal with the Feather when Oliver taps out for it. Feather could be the nail in the coffin for any deck that doesn't have a ton of interaction. The effect is just insanely powerful.
Yeah, the Feather deck is really powerful when it's doing its thing. You saw kind of what happens when the deck is not doing its thing in game 1.
Well, any deck that draws 4 spells and 9 lands is not going to win.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is that the Boros deck, you don't really get card selection in those colors.
Well, you don't normally, but this Feather deck actually has quite a bit. Not only does 10th District Legionnaire let you scry whenever you target it, but you get Temple of Triumph, and even God's Willing lets you scry as well. So you don't get a ton, but this deck is one of the few aggressive decks, especially in these red and white colors, that does have that card selection with the scrying.
That is true. It is above average for Boros. Both players taking a mulligan here.
Yeah, I think that benefits the Boros Feather deck more than does the Temur Elementals deck. As you saw, Oliver was able to do quite a bit of work with those 4 cards last game that were not lands. So he can function on a lower overall resource count, I think, than the Temur Elementals deck. They need early mana accelerators and a big payoff spell, whereas Oliver basically just needs one of 20 cards and then a Feather or a creature.
Tomajko also gets to be on the play, so if he gets that hand that has a nice curve, he can really kind of push that advantage.
Now, this new London Mulligan does benefit decks like Boros Feather quite nicely, but I think it's just healthy in general. I'm starting to come around to it. I don't really like how it affects the mulligan decisions of some modern decks, but you make good points. It's not like Tron didn't mulligan a million times a match anyway.
Yeah, it tends to amplify incentives that were already there, has been
Right.
my impression. Players are going to look at 7, hoping to only put 1 back.
Yeah, Oliver here looks like he has 2 lands and some creatures.
Yeah, I think it's a nice spread of lands and creatures, but I don't know if it's a nice spread of lands and spells.
Yeah, I think he's going to keep it, though, because he does have that Temple of Triumph as his first play. As he has like 3 lands and 3 creatures after that, and the Scribe from the Temple might be able to find him one of those instant sorceries. Sorry, 2 lands and 4 creatures, rather. So a bit threat heavy, but if Johhson has a draw featuring a lot of lava coils and fries and various removal effects, this is a great hand for Oliver.
And it looks like Johhson will be going to 5. So Tomajko seeming fairly likely to have a shot at a Game 3.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the Elementals deck can just ramp into a crazy fast Chandra Awakened Inferno, and that could be detrimental for Oliver, but you know, he does have a very creature-heavy draw, so if he just never draws a Gird for Battle or a Defiant Strike or anything like that, you know, if he just draws a couple more creatures or a couple more lands, his deck's not really doing anything.
And on Johnson's side of the thing, Risen Reef is one of the more absurd value engines we've seen in Standard in some time.
Yeah. And it's not like Oliver has that much interaction himself, just Reckless Rage and a couple shocks and maybe some sideboard cards here and there.
And we'll see if Johhson can keep on 5 here.
I see a mix of land and spells. He's probably keeping this 5.
Seems likely from here.
Looks like Omnath, Leafkin Druid, Chandra, and 4 lands, so he's got to pitch 2. I'd probably pitch land Chandra.
He agrees.
Or maybe that's a Living Twister, not a Omnath, excuse me. Living Twister might do some work here in this matchup.
Reasonable blocker, especially when Tomajko is just full on creatures.
Yeah, for sure.
That player's underway. Here's that Temple of Triumph. Tomajko sees a spell. It's a God's Willing.
Yeah, and that one is okay, but it's not quite doing what he needs it to do. And I think he is correct there by putting it on the bottom. He's going to probably lead off with 10th District Legionnaire, understanding that that one is not only the most aggressive, but also the one you're most happy with dying.
Tap Steam Vents for Johhson. Now we're on to turn 2 for Tomajko. Here's Dreadhorde Arcanist.
Maybe because he has no instant or sorceries, he's more fine with the Arcanist dying than the 10th District Legionnaire. But I have to imagine he's going to try to deploy the Feather last, just because it's most important of all the creatures in his deck in this matchup.
Tap Stomping Ground in 2 for Johhson. Tomajko starts his turn 3 with an attack with the Arcanist. Johhson to 19. And here comes Feather.
Now, this one might just have the most raw power out of all of them, and since he doesn't have an instant or sorcery maybe at the ready, he's okay with that one dying too. Plus, Johhson is on 5 cards, and he's got a rather slow start, so it's possible Tomajko is just like, okay, I'm going to play my first threat's the bait. He didn't kill it. He didn't kill the Dreadhorde Arcanist. That means he probably doesn't have a removal spell because Arcanist is pretty terrifying in this deck. Now he's like, okay, well, I'll play Feather and try to get max value while you're still establishing your side of the battlefield.
For Johhson, it's Rookbound Cray. He'll cast Living Twister. Michael's going to give that one a read. It's a card that didn't see a ton of play before the core set dropped, propped up by the fact that it's an elemental. Doesn't have any static keywords, but you can use it to discard a land, to shock something for 2 mana, or you can use it to return a land to your hand.
I'm really hoping that Oliver puts together some cool Feather trick here with Reckless Rage or something like that. Because as it stands, the Living Twister bricks the Dreadhorde Arcanist and is also relatively problematic for the 10th District Legionnaire that's stuck in his hand.
So Tomajko attacks with Feather. Johhson to 16. Post-combat, plays Legionnaire, and he'll pass. We'll see if Johhson can start to claw into this game.
Yeah, I mean, Oliver's draw wasn't really punishing. Like, he's obviously got some threats. But Johhson has some time to really catch back up. If he has multiple lands in hand, he can just start throwing them at the creatures.
Tomajko does have a setup that gets really scary if he just has a spell.
Right. God's Willing here would be a nightmare for Johhson. And he's got to have that in the back of his head. He can't just think that Oliver just never has it. 2 games in a row, just has nothing. Are you kidding?
Right. It's going to be a little bit tough to leverage a Living Twister. Remember, Johhson has mulligan to 5 in this game. Play a Breeding Pool tapped as his land for turn.
He can also just bounce some of the lands he has on the battlefield. You know, this could be a relatively low resource game for him, and he might actually end up winning the game with only access to 2 or 3 lands on the battlefield. And I think he's more than happy to try to do that since he is on this mold of 5.
Passed with his 3 mana up. See what Tomajko can do from here. Interesting attack. Feather and Arcanist attacking here.
Yeah, that kind of screams Reckless Rage to me. If he blocks the Dreadhorde Arcanist, a Reckless Rage will kill the Living Twister at 5 toughness. Johhson opting to take the damage here, recognizing that might be a really problematic sequence for him if it does happen.
Yeah, no blocks. He goes to 12. See if Tomajko has any follow-up on his turn. Still some creatures hanging out there.
Honestly, I think it was a pure bluff. I think he's just going to play another Dreadhorde Arcanist here and just do the same thing again next turn. He has a War Boss. He has just more threats. This is what I was kind of afraid of.
Yes, he's going to cast a second Dreadhorde Arcanist. Passes to Johhson.
Just got word from the back tables that Orzhov Vampires fell. And Orzhov Vampires also passed. Zach Keeney takes his match 2-1 over Dustin Taylor in that Orzhov Vampires mirror.
Yeah, the lower seed, Keeney actually broke serve there. And our main feature, here's a Cavalier of Thorns for Johhson. Now things start to get a little hairy for Tomajko.
Yeah, so this giant reach creature basically bricks Feather unless Tomajko can find some way to clear it. He's in a bit of a pickle if he doesn't have anything except more creatures in hand.
Cavalier of Thorns finds Rootbound Crag. As you mentioned, the Cavalier has reach. The Living Tornado does not, which strikes me as a spectacular flavor fail.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever come in contact with a tornado before, but it only goes as high as the clouds.
I do not consider birds advantaged against tornadoes. That's
Birds
all.
are highly advantaged against tornadoes. They fly over tornadoes all the time, literally.
They never get caught, not once.
I'm sure they get caught sometimes.
If the tornado was sentient, I think it would be a different competition. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but it can only go as high as the cloud that's fueling it. That's literally how tornadoes work.
I'm not a tornado scientist, but I'm skeptical of your claims.
I'm from Alabama. We get we get tornadoed all the time.
Fourth land for Tomajko and another Legionnaire. No attacks this time. Can't run that Feather into that Cavalier.
Yeah, that's not a bluff worth making.
No.
You got to block if you're Johhson in that spot. And Oliver here just sitting on empty. Again, this time, though, he's flooded on creatures, and that's kind of the downside of playing a deck like this as someone who has played Infect a ton in the past, who played Heroic and Ban Heroic and Blue-White Heroic in the past. Sometimes if you draw too many threats or too many of your spells, your deck just doesn't really do much of anything. And here we're seeing Oliver has drawn, 6, 7, 8 creatures and no tricky stuff. And Johnson's just brickwalling his whole battlefield with a 5/5 reach.
Leafkin Druid into Omnath for Johhson, and that's elemental number 4.
Yeah, and this is 4 power here, or 4 elementals here, so that's going to shoot down Feather. Oliver has no way to protect it and no way to punish Johhson. I'm sure that's a big sigh of relief on the left side of the table.
Yeah, Feather down. I want to ask you about turn 0 of this game, or turn 1 rather. Tomajko scry with Temple of Triumph.
Bottom to God's Willing.
How you feel about that in retrospect?
Don't love it. If you don't want it, it shouldn't be in your deck. You need any spell there to make Feather good. It's particularly good at protecting Feather. It makes your 10th District Legionnaires survive a removal spell, and it gives you an extra scry to dig for more instant sorceries.
And Johhson got aggressive there. Cavalier just comes across. Tomajko to 15.
Yeah, why not? No more flyer, no spells from the other side. What are you afraid of? What's he going to do? Play? If he draws a Gird for Battle is like the worst possible, right? You just block. You got a 2/5, you got a 3/3, you can just block some. Chump with the Leafkin Druid at the worst case scenario.
Legion Warboss shows up for Tomajko. Omnath blocks the token. Nothing happens. We go back to Johhson.
It's not like a single God's Willing would have changed this game very much. So I don't want to, badmouth Oliver on that decision or anything like that. He's looking for something more explosive. He's looking for Gird for Battle or something more worthwhile with the Dreadhorde Arcanist, like a Reckless Rage, even a Shock to slow down the opponent. So its hindsight is obviously 2020, where the God's Willing would have been very good at protecting the Feather from the Omnath Looks of the Royal. It would have been able to grow those 10th District Legionnaires multiple times over and continue to scry through your deck with those abilities. But again, he does not have that kind of foresight. He has to assume that in the top 15 cards of his deck, he'll find something, a Shock, another spell, even another God's Willing is fine. You just would rather look for something like Shock or Reckless Rage to contain those mana creatures from the Elementals deck.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense to ask for more. And like you're saying, the deck does have a lot of cards that do deliver more than God's Willing would have. That is certainly true.
Now, here's a neato trick from Johhson. He uses the Living Twister. He doesn't have a land to play for the turn, so he taps a green, bounces the forest, replays the forest. That gives you the trigger from Omnath's ability. And now he's going to float some mana here and likely, I'm guessing, bounce some lands with Living Twister and start shooting down some creatures from the opposing side.
So he picked up the forest once. I'll pick it up again. It's got a green floating and a red floating. Call that 2 green and 2 red.
And he's going to spend... well, he tapped 2 from the Leafkin Druid, 2 red from the 2 lands in play, bounce the forest, use the 2 red to play the Chandra. I believe he has none floating right now, if I'm not mistaken, but don't quote me on that.
So here is a Chandra Acolyte of Flame. It's going to bring back a Fry that was milled over with the Cavalier. Takes down one of those Legionnaires.
Pretty sure he made one more mana than he's supposed to. I'm not 100% though.
Activation on the Twister, take down the War Boss. Discards that forest. And now here's a pretty big attack. Omnath, Twister, and Cavalier all coming across.
Yeah, this is a very confident attack from Johhson. He's saying, hey, I'm trying to close this game as quickly as possible before you get any more traction. And even if Oliver peels something good here, I don't think anything is one-shot lethal.
And Tomajko falls to 4 from that attack, hangs on with all of his creatures. Looks like Tomajko picks up a land, and yeah, he's just going to pack it in. Chris Johhson, 2-0 over Oliver Tomajko. The Boros Feather deck was pretty good for Tomajko through most of the tournament, but just did not cooperate with him here.
Yeah, unfortunately for him, just didn't really assemble